Hello. Good morning. It is 10 o'clock in the morning on Thursday. Therefore, it must be time for another teissTalk. I'm your host, Jeff White. Hello. Welcome back to those of you who've been before. Hello to all newcomers among you. We are here every Thursday morning at 10, every Tuesday afternoon at 4. We are live with another teissTalk discussion. You can see all of the talks on the website, but what's the point? Do you want to be here live? Please do use the chat tab. You can get in touch with us. Ask us questions in the Q&A bit, or just give us some abuse in the public chat part. Hello and good morning to all of you getting ready to talk to us this morning. We are going to be talking about ransomware this morning, which is obviously the topic du jour and just keeps getting more and more du jour. We obviously had Biden and Putin getting together recently and talking about ransomware. I want to have a quick chat with that to our panelists. Most importantly, though, one of you gets the opportunity this morning to win a teissTalk mug. Can confirm tea tastes 26% better through a teissTalk mug. If you want to win the mug, I was thinking we've had some success actually in ransomware over the last week or so. Members of the Klopp ransomware gang were arrested. 6 members, I should say alleged members of the gang, were arrested by Ukrainian and South Korean authorities and law enforcement. So I thought the question in order to win the teissTalk mug, very obscure, but there was a British comedy series in which the word Klopp was a catchphrase. So if you can come up with the British comedy series in which Klopp was the catchphrase, you win a teissTalk mug. If you're one of our few attendees who hasn't already got a teissTalk mug, Klopp. Anyway, so yes, that's what's occurred to me this morning through the dim haze of my hangover. We have got a great panel to be talking about ransomware actually today. We've got lots of different sort of aspects. We're going to be hearing later on from Andy Powell, who is Chief Information Security Officer at AP Moller Maersk, who obviously have had their own cybersecurity history, interestingly. So Andy's going to be talking about that. But for the moment, I want to welcome the rest of our panelists onto our teissTalk stage. We've got, if you guys could switch on your webcams, we've got Chris White, who's Head of Cyber and Innovation at the Cyber Resilience Centre for the South East. We've got Benoit Hendricks, who is Principal Analyst at the Information Security Forum. And we've got Mariana Pereira, Director of Email Security at Darktrace. Welcome to you all. And good to have you back, Mariana. It's been a little while. Can I come to you first, Mariana, just in terms of the email aspect of this? To what extent is email still the key delivery mechanism then for ransomware?
Oh, thanks, Jeff, and good morning, everyone. You know, it's huge. It's difficult actually to quantify exactly which percentage of attacks, of ransomware attacks, are starting in email. But it is, you know, we've seen this stat over and over again that more than 90% of all cybersecurity incidents actually starts with an inbox occurrence, whether that is the payload itself, the malicious payload, or maybe just the first step in that attack phase to direct somebody to have a conversation with somebody they shouldn't, or visit a website where then there is some malicious content hosted. So it's certainly still the entry. The preferred method of entry into organizations is through those human users who can more easily be tricked. And it's still the case that there are many weird and wonderful ways with which to hide then that ransomware attack within the body of an email or within a link or an attachment. So it's constantly evolving, and more than just attacking the user, that inbox really becomes the avenue into that business. And from there, you know, all sorts of different things. Interestingly, what we have seen with ransomware is that sometimes the order of operations has changed, when before they would use their time to be able to maybe do some reconnaissance before launching the secondary parts of their mission. Sometimes the email infrastructure is used immediately to get more access and leverage the contacts of that person's inbox.
Because this is the thing, I wondered whether, Mariana, if I can stay with you for a second, the tactics have slightly shifted over the last couple of years. You've now got the sort of exfiltration of data, the stealing of corporate data, which is used as a sort of stiffener to get people to pay the ransom. Does that affect how the email attack breaks down? You know, previously it would have been email ransomware, whereas now it's email data slurping and then ransomware. Has it changed? Have you seen a change in terms of how the email attack vector is used?
Yeah, certainly. So the consistent thing is that email is still that first point of entry, right? But what's happening once they get in is really where that there's a lot of variation. And as you said, Jeff, the exfiltration of data to then say, right, you might be able to get back operational, but we'll still release your deepest, darkest secrets. That's one avenue. The other is also using the email environment to then once you've compromised that account, using that legitimate account or legitimate in everyone's contact size to further the attack. So sending emails from that person's email address to more contacts and more businesses. So let's take you and me, for example, right? If you receive an email from me, we're accustomed to communicate in a certain way. Would you be able to tell when it's actually me behind the keyboard or when it's an attacker who's had access to my account, who's then sending you something pretending to be me? So there are so many different evolutions of how that inbox is weaponized. And yeah, it can get pretty creative.
Yes, indeed. In terms of being pretty creative, by the way, I'm pleased to say one of our attendees has already got the answer to my question. I was just going to scroll up. Paul Baird. Paul, well done. You guessed correctly. The show where Klopp was the catchphrase was "Hello, hello." For some reason, all of the other characters in "Hello, hello," which was a sort of slightly World War II themed comedy, said "Heil Hitler," and one of the characters said "Klopp," which we found hilarious as kids. I don't know why. So well done, Paul. The Tice elf in the background will be getting you your mug. Thanks for taking part. And no prizes for whoever guessed spitting image. Sorry. Listen, I want to go on a obviously more serious note. Chris, can you talk us through, the cyber resilience centres? How many of them are there? How do they work? They're sort of part of they've been set up by the police, but they're part of the police. How does it interface with the police force?
No problems. Morning, everyone. So the Home Office and the National Police Chief Council, which is the representative voice of all the police forces across the UK, have decided before the pandemic came last year that small businesses, micros, small and mediums, needed to get access to cybersecurity help. I know that that help is out there, but at the moment, the cybersecurity centres were born and bred to make cybersecurity help affordable to those that currently find it unaffordable. How do we do that? We're using the talent pool from the local universities, which is aligned to the 10 cyber resilience centres across the UK. The students are going to be in their year 1, 2 and 3 graduation period. They're going to be studying cybercrime and computer science. They're going to be practicing and hobbying, I guess, like the white hat skills. We are offering about 9 services, and that could be anything from vulnerability scanning to security awareness training to reviewing of business continuity. I know when we all went to primary school and we heard the fire alarm go off, we practiced fire alarm drills. So as adults, we're pretty decent at it. We all walk out into the car parks, we all count how many people are there, and we just know how to do it. And again, we replicate that with like first aid. When the time comes when unfortunately we might need to do CPR, we've learned first aid, so it's like an innate action. But with regards to cybersecurity, we're not quite there yet. When the current threat, I think, on most small businesses and medium is a cyber threat, and how do your staff react when a cyber incident occurs? So, yeah, the cyber resilience centres are run by the police. It's staffed by police officers, and we utilise the tomorrow's talent pool of university students to offer those services.
Interesting stuff. Thanks for that, because it's a good overview. I just wonder, in terms of the folks you're dealing with, as I say, you tend to concentrate on small, medium-sized businesses, maybe micro businesses. We're told, that ransomware is the sort of driving force behind cybercrime at the moment. In terms of the people that you're dealing with, to what extent is that true? How often are small and medium-sized businesses hit by this? Is ransomware the key threat for them, or is it one among many?
So if I talk about over the last quarter, certainly I can confidently talk about the southeast of England, that crimes remained consistent. Last quarter, we did see a rise in email and social media compromise of those accounts. So those figures have gone down. But when you look at ransomware, unfortunately, the figures have gone up slightly. So there's been a slight increase in positive ransomware reports. There's been a couple of strains of ransomware that I guess have been more successful than others, and that is the getting in through the network intrusion, the data exfiltration, and then the data exposure. Why has it been a little bit more successful? It might be the availability. So ransomware as a service is now offering out the software for those that I guess have got or the need that less technical skills to activate and operate the ransomware. That is now available to more, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's interesting. The ransomware as a service stuff we'll come on to a bit later. I think it's fascinating sort of evolution and how that's working out. Although I think there's shifts in that marketplace after the Colonial Pipeline fiasco. Benoit, can I come to you for the Information Security Forum? Firstly, as principal analyst, can you sort of describe what your role is there, what you're actually doing at the forum?
Sure. Morning, Jeff. Morning, everyone. Yes, analysts, research, tools, reports. So we work at the Information Security Forum. We work with 400 plus organizations. We work very closely with these organizations, and we develop research tools, practical methods to help them with their cyber issues. And one of the recent reports we worked on is called the extension level attacks. And it wasn't particularly looking at ransomware, but all these events, cyber events that can really bring the whole business down. And when we looked at this with lots of organizations, so all our member organizations, we came back to some quite interesting conclusions, quite simple in some ways, but with a lot of details, a lot of statistics. Things like backups. We all know that for ransomware, backups and offsite backups are quite important. Understanding your estate, your assets, having your list of assets all fully up to date, documented, and then of course things like patching and doing some vulnerability scanning. So these are very basic, simple things, but there are still things that we need to do more and more and more these days. So we looked at this, and so these are the kind of things we do at the ASF, and we also work hard on producing lots of preparing lots of controls statements. We have this different list of controls. So I've just described 3 of them, but we can go, of course, beyond just 3. We've got top 7 controls, or top 20, or goes up to hundreds, if not thousands.
Interesting stuff. Yeah, we've had some chat on this. Abiodun. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get the pronunciation right. Bit of a tricky one, but there is no one size fits all in cybersecurity. We all learn best practices, and Paul says people and organizations fail at the basics, which is true. And Paul McCallum says, sorry, you're late. Yes, you are, Paul. You should have been here at 10, and you could have won yourself a mug. Andy, can I come to you on that? The backups was interesting because listening to a presentation you did about the big incident that happened at Maersk, which we'll come on to in more detail, I think, later on. But one of the things that I found was interesting was the backups weren't necessarily offline. Is that correct? What was the situation there?
Well, I think hopefully you can all hear me okay, but I think the situation 4 years ago is very different to today. And I've said this at many of the fora that I've spoken at. I mean, I joined the company 3 years ago, about 9 months after the attack. But I think 4 years ago, maturity for very many companies at the time was that we had online backups. There was a degree of offline, but most companies relied on online type backup stores, which were much simpler and cheaper to operate, to be blunt. And that's largely what they relied on. Of course, the nature of the NotPetya attack 4 years ago was, firstly, it wasn't a ransomware attack. The very name NotPetya said what it wasn't. It was a disruptive cyber weapon, purporting to be a ransomware weapon, but it wasn't. And it was very complicated and sophisticated. And it did exploit the online backup, largely through Microsoft at the time. Now, I think many companies since then have learnt many lessons, not just from that attack, but from subsequent type attacks, that data and your ability to have a clean backup of data, almost what we call the minimal viable company, is really a big construct now for many big companies in particular, that we look at, could we restart an MVC post an attack so that we can keep the business running? And clearly, to run an MVC, you need some form of offline, whether it's virtual offline and rather than air-gapped offline, but the ability to segment your data in a very clear and protected manner so that you can recover a clean source should you be attacked. So things have moved on a lot. I think a long-winded answer to a great question, Jeff, but the world has moved on. We do need to look more at these virtual offline type products, many of which are on the market. We do need to ensure we also have an affordable range of those as well. So a great point by Chris, that the small and medium-sized enterprises, which are in our supply chains and which impact us markedly, are more likely to be hit by ransomware. And therefore, what can we do to provide, the means to prevent them having to pay a ransom to get their data back? And offline storage is clearly a key solution to that.
Yeah, really
affordable offline storage. So, yeah,
that's really interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. So it's kind of it's online, but it's divorced from your network. So it's basically a sort of shadow copy of the minimum you need for your company.
Yeah, and that's just, by the way, I mean, that's so critical because, I mean, there are two clearly. I think Chris has touched on it, but there's a number of other methods of ransomware attack these days, which clearly realize that people will try and restart with clean data. So of course, what they're trying to do is exfil data as well to ransom you against the data they've already seized. You know, the sensitivity of data that could be then put on the web and you know, show you up. And they're doing that because more and more companies are able to restart with clean data. And so if they can't just block your data, why not just steal it and threaten to publish it? Which is why that methodology has now started to increase quite markedly. So I guess we go back to the point, stop it happening in the first place. It's really where the logic goes back to, doesn't it?
Yeah, indeed. And we'll come back to Mariana on that in a second. We had a question from Paul McCallum about the idea of ransomware being seen as simply a cost of business. And I think, Chris, if I can come to you on this, Paul's asked, SMEs and one-man bands or one-person bands, actually, as Paul's rightly phrased it, don't do the patching and updating that their larger competitors can. Can those businesses see this as a cost of doing business too? Is it, to what extent is it worth running, just as devil's advocate, worth running the risk of thinking, look, I'll deal with it if it happens, and I'll just write it in as a cost of business potentially?
So again, it might be down to awareness. I do see it as awareness because that falls in line with the other question about, do you see any improved effectiveness as a result of implemented cyber essentials? So when I do speak to some businesses, and I know this particular audience will probably be acutely aware of corporate images and admin privileges, but certainly when you go to the small business level, some people don't see a risk of doing their day-to-day business activities on a machine that has only one account, which is an admin account. So having the basics in place of cyber essentials, which I know there's plenty of pillars on there, from only a sole user having access to that account, to having like a non-flat network where guest Wi-Fi is certainly different to your internal Wi-Fi, your own devices, that once you implement cyber essentials, it does stop the majority of cybercrime, and it's the basics which we're missing.
Yeah, interesting stuff. And there's another, as you said, there's another question about whether, do you see any effectiveness with organizations that have gone through some level of cyber essentials? And sort of answers that question that it sounds like yes. If you've gone through cyber essentials, you've covered off a lot of the basics, right? Yeah,
I've seen patching is very, very important, as we all know, but I do understand that sometimes the bigger the organization, you need to sandbox stuff because it might have a consequential impact on other devices connected. But certainly the majority of the cyber attacks do exploit weaknesses that are out there in the wild, and computers are scanning every day, even when we sleep. Certainly when you go to quite a few businesses, they will have a receptionist on the front of house that screens visitors and directs them in the right direction and challenges strangers. You have it on nightclubs, don't you, where you have door stewards where they control the firewall, don't they? People going in and out. But with regards to cybersecurity, we're not quite there with investing in probably one of the most important things of a productive business these days.
Yeah, interesting. Minesh has commented, he says they use a mixture of ISO and NIST, haven't specifically chosen one over the other as they complement each other, but the NIST CSF has helped us get the basics in place. Thanks for that, Minesh. And Chris Wheatley has asked, what are organizations doing proactively to protect themselves from ransomware attacks? The average cost per ransomware attack is increasing hugely. Far more emphasis is being placed on that proactive approach rather than being reactive once it's happened. Benoit, can we come to you on that in terms of, the proactive steps organizations can take, that they are taking?
Yeah, sure. I've already touched on that, yeah, and I have to come back again to the basics, yeah, the backups, the patching, and all this. But it's also about resilience, testing your business continuity planning, and be prepared to act upon the ransomware. There's a lot of things happening. Yeah, ransomware is such a big issue now that there's a lot of initiatives out there. There are more and more tools for decrypting the ransomware. The security vendors are also upping their game in offering some really good solutions. So things are moving. So there's a bit of a hope at the end of the tunnel. So again, starting with the basics, be prepared to respond to the incident. Probably not assume that it's necessarily going to happen. You are going to be hit by ransomware, but you have to have this mindset of a breach or some form of cybersecurity incident will happen to your organization. So as much as possible, putting the controls up front, and then be prepared to respond to any type of incident.
Mariana, can I come to you just to go back to the sort of email aspect of this, which, as you said, is still a sort of major driver. To what extent is it possible, once the email intrusions happened and once you've fallen victim to that, to what extent is it possible to filter out subsequent malware? So, if the email compromise has happened, can you still stop, a ransomware attack? Can you still spot the ransomware before it comes through?
Absolutely, certainly. Thank you for that, Jeff. Because that email coming through might have been the entry mechanism or the weakness that was exploited, but there are usually 4 or 5 different steps that will follow, which is also a fair moment to disrupt the attacker's activity. I just wanted also, though, to go back a little bit to pick on what Benoit was saying in terms of those basics. And because often we're talking about 2 different categories of companies, and we think, the big corporations that have investments, Andy definitely falls into that category a bit more, the minimum viable company. I absolutely love that. And that idea of, from Chris's point earlier, of dealing with those fire alarms. But there's also another thing to remember, that even though we talk about ransomware as one big category, just when we think about data exfiltration, I was just sort of mapping it out, there are at least 3 different possible avenues in which then that fundamentally impacts your business differently, even if it was done through email. So is it data exfiltration because that leads to embarrassment of the company? Is it intellectual property that was stolen, compromising potentially the valuation of your company? Is it to sell data on the black market? Or is it actually to hold your company hostage so you cannot operate, which is the more classic way that we think of it, right? And if any one of these, if we're thinking about how then a criminal is holding your business hostage to a ransom, that point of entry of the email is simply the doorway they're coming in through. And if we think in terms of the physical security equivalency, everyone has locks on our doors, right? Long gone are the days in which we don't even lock up or put additional locks on those doors and train the receptionist to say, these are the people who are allowed in and out. And to a certain degree, we need to, I think, be thinking more proactively in terms of how we're securing that channel, because pretty much indiscriminately, everything hits the inbox. And it's just not possible for even me as a human. I'm pretty well trained at trying to spot them. I have a really hard time being on top of every single email that I get, let alone trying to triage all of them. It's just not viable. So there is, I think, a change of pace that we need to be doing here. That is saying, yes, okay, I can do all of the basics right, but even big companies, government companies are being caught by these attacks. So it's more of the same is not going to solve this.
Mm-hmm. Interesting stuff. There's a bit of discussion about simulations, ransomware simulations and so on, which I think is an interesting topic. But I want to deal with Tom's question. Tom Callahan's asked about the use of cyber insurance, which is obviously the whole topic in itself, but he's actually asked, any insights into the use of insurance as a control and the need to educate boards and business owners to the potential financial impact of an incident? So that's an interesting point. If I can come maybe to you, Andy, on that, in terms of using cyber insurance, not necessarily for its pure insurance purpose, but to kind of get a handle on the valuation of it. If this happens, here's how much it's going to cost. Is that something that's come up at Maersk or that you've seen elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of conversations around cyber insurance and the value or otherwise of that. I think part of the challenge for many companies today, let's go back to another point that's been raised. Education of the board as to their responsibilities is point number one. As directors of a company, there's no difference to a cyber attack, I think, than to fraud. They're accountable. They need to be held accountable for their actions, and to tolerate fraud, which is in effect what they're saying with respect to paying ransom and a ransomware, is unacceptable. Let's be clear. And there's a lot of work to be done, I think, about how we align those principles, particularly at board level. But let's go back to the value of cyber insurance and what it's about. We have a degree of cyber insurance at Maersk, but it's, to be honest, it is a backup, and it is purely to cover potential business losses, while we recover. And I think the world is changing. I think the value of cyber insurance is diminishing. And again, to a point made earlier, companies can't tolerate long outages anymore, particularly digital companies. And therefore, the value of cyber insurance to pay any lost business through a disruption is becoming meaningless, because companies are expecting to be up 99.9% in the digital era. And therefore, having insurance to cover any 0.001% outages is becoming nonsensical. So I think cyber insurance fills a gap at the moment for many, but I think its future is questionable. So that's the first point. There's a second point, I think, which is even more important. And this is the problem with small and medium-sized companies. And Chris made this point really well. Cyber insurance is not an excuse for inactivity. And this is what some companies see it as. They just say, oh, we've got cyber insurance. That's fine. We don't need to invest in this complex and difficult cyber stuff, do we? And that, I'm afraid, is the biggest disaster that cyber insurance has brought. It has created an inertia, particularly at the small and medium-sized company level, which we've got to get over. I know the UK NCSC has done a great job of trying to remind company directors you can't use that as an excuse for getting out your responsibility. So a long-winded answer to a great question, but I think cyber insurance fills a gap at the moment in some companies. It may become decreasingly important. And at the same time, that is a good thing, because I think it would put the onus back on companies to take the right responsibility to protect themselves, their customers, and their supply chains.
Yeah, interesting. Certainly in our chat, Scott Wilson's got a pretty dim view of the insurers. I'm in a local group of ISOs. He says, we're firmly of the view cyber insurance is broken, doesn't cover anyone really. Benoit, can I come to you on this?
Yes,
what's the forum's view on this one?
I was going to say something on cyber insurance. The view is rather pessimistic there. I understand it's the practical view, but we're doing some research as well on cyber insurance, actually, right at the moment. And the more positive view I'd like to add is that cyber insurance is not just necessarily seen by everyone as a comfort zone. It's a great way of incentivizing organizations to have this basic layer of controls, because if insurance companies do their job well in building the right premiums, and they want to check that you are insurable, that you have some good layer, good baseline of controls. So that's one thing. And then the other thing, when it comes to ransomware, like I said, Andy, there's a lot of debate about should the insurers pay the ransom or not. Of course, they shouldn't. They should really be in a position to be able to help organizations, and especially more for possibly more medium-sized organizations who are really suffering from these these ransomware attacks. So hopefully we can have a slightly more positive view of cyber insurance. But yes, there's still quite a lot of work to do, and it's been a couple of years, that cyber insurance has been.
It's interesting, isn't it? Cyber insurance useful, but not in the way that you might necessarily directly sort of think about it. Just lastly on this, Chris, can I come to you? Because obviously the smaller businesses that you're dealing with, are they able to get cyber insurance? Does that work for them? What's their experience?
Yeah, that's a great place to go. If you have a look at the website, our website of secrc.co.uk/the UK network, there is some information on there that would take you to the IASME consortium, which talks about getting cyber essentials. And once you achieve and get accredited certification for cyber essentials, then you can get free cyber insurance as part of that process. There are obviously T's and C's involved in that, but cyber essentials is the entry mark for the due diligence to cyber security. And like Andy said, just because you got insurance, it doesn't necessarily cover all the points. We all have home insurance and car insurance, don't we? And there's certain expectations that we should lock all the doors and windows when we leave and put the alarm on and have a certain specification of doors. And that essentially is what we still need to do, even if you've got cyber insurance. You still have to take your own due diligence to securing your company. But yeah, cyber essentials, and have a look at that because it does come with cyber insurance once you achieve it.
Interesting stuff, really interesting stuff. We're going to zero in now on the Maersk aspect of this. So I'm going to say thank you to the rest of our panelists for joining us at the beginning. Really, really good. Chris White, who's head of Cyber and Innovation, Cyber Resilience Centre for the Southeast. Benoit Hendricks, principal analyst at the Information Security Forum, and Mariana Pereira, of course, director of email security at Darktrace. Thanks to all three of you. Have a great rest of the day, and I'm going to have a chat more directly, I think, now with just Andy on the stuff at AP model Maersk. As you say, I mean, things have moved on since that 2017 attack, but I just found some of the stuff that came out as a result of that really interesting. You talked about shadow IT, which I understood to be sort of people using their own devices or their own systems, but actually you were talking about the macros that connected the different applications being something that you hadn't haven't necessarily backed up or thought of. I thought that was a really interesting aspect. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, and I don't think any company is immune to those processes. I think all companies try and improve processes, and of course the plethora of what I would call sort of front end technology does allow you to develop macros. It's not difficult to write a macro to do an automated cut and paste between two applications you've got on your screen. I do it at home. I think a lot of people do it sometimes, and of course, that's happened in the workplace. People find ways to simplify their work. They don't always document it. So
Yes.
eventually, over a period of time, all these things build up without perhaps the proper documentation. And therefore, as we discovered, trying to recover our systems, as we did, then led to an uncovering of all these macros, which had been lost or broken as part of the attack. And then suddenly people going back 3 years before the macro was written to where they were before. It didn't assume the systems didn't work. It just meant that the automation, the self-automation, as I call it, had vanished. So we talked a lot about that. And what I think the key issue is visibility. I have one watchword at Maersk at the moment is visibility. Give me visibility. Bring out your dead is my policy. And I haven't changed that, which is, look, I'm not going to tell you off if you've done something under the radar in terms of development activity, because I think that's the wrong thing to do. There is a degree of carrot and stick. Absolutely, the stick sometimes has to come into play. If somebody is doing something that is absolutely putting your network at risk, then you need to take quite firm action. But I think the carrot is important as well. You've got to encourage developers to be in the open about their problem. And I think that the modern method for many digital companies of product development and the incremental development is hopefully getting around this problem of self-development, if that makes sense, because we can now do rapid changes for people, which prevents them trying to do it themselves. So cut a long story short, I would encourage people, as a lesson learned, to offer a sort of amnesty to ensure that you can get visibility. Without visibility, you can't protect things or you can't recover things. And that's so important.
And also, I mean, this idea of a minimum viable company, I think that's a really powerful sort of thing. I was thinking actually of my own experience, that basically there's two things I need. Number one, my email inbox. Number two, my diary. And those actually, without those two things, I'm stuffed. Everything else I can kind of, so it's interesting in terms of the sort of Maersk situation. Where have you reached in terms of a minimal viable company? What are the red lines for you? What have you put in a box and sealed, as it were?
I'm not really going to go into the detail of that for obvious reasons. No offense to the people on this forum, but I'd rather not sort of detail our approach to this. I think generically, let's look at the landscape for companies like ourselves. What is the general process that you need to go through? Perhaps would be the best approach, and that you can read into that what you need. The first is, what are your business critical assets and applications? And you'll be astonished how many companies don't know what their business critical asset and applications are. So, Jeff, you said you knew which your two most important things were. But I reckon if you spoke to a number of people and asked them, they could probably struggle to say, well, I use a bit of this and a bit of that, but, I couldn't do without that, I don't think. But you've got to go through that exercise. You've physically got to go through the exercise with your company to say, okay, what is critical? What will keep our bookings flowing? What will keep the business ticking over? What is the sort of the single point service that we rely on? Identify those really early, and then work out how to ensure that they are fully recoverable and protected. So that BCA analysis is so important. The second piece of analysis is impact based. You've got to do a lot of work about the dollar value of the loss of a particular service, to decide whether investing in a expensive recovery mechanism is worthwhile. So if losing that service will cost you $10, do you pay $100 for a recovery service? Probably not. If losing that service is $10 million and you're paying $1 million for a recovery service, then maybe it's something you need to look at. So there's a balance factor based on impact. And I think a lot of companies like ourselves are now starting to work the impact piece in dollar values, using all sorts of Monte Carlo simulations, insurance models, funnily enough, come into the fray. So you work out the impact of the loss, and then you work out the investment required to recover and protect yourself. So there's a number of techniques, as I've already mentioned, which I think are really important that companies need to go through to decide, firstly, what is in the MVC box, and then decide okay, now we know what's in there, what should we be paying to protect it versus the loss value of that service.
Interesting. There's been some discussion in the chat about simulations, ransomware simulations, and some sort of skepticism about, can you ever actually do one that's really real? Because obviously, to do the simulation, you have to inflict the damage that you don't want to happen. What's your view? Have you managed to do simulations, and do you think they were effective?
Yeah, I think most big companies like ourselves use third-party pen testers. We don't call it pen testing anymore, by the way. We've stopped using the term because I think it's quite old-fashioned. No offense to the pen testing companies who are on the call. We much prefer to use attack simulation as our mantra, and we ask our third-party attack simulators to look through a range of attack vectors and scenarios. Some of the most recent ones are, for many people on the call, be familiar. If you understand the current nature of the threat, there's a lot of individuals acting as what we call sort of access brokers. They're the phishing attackers. They're the ones trying to steal credentials to then sell on to the ransomware, big organized crime ransomware gangs. Because to be honest, it's almost a sort of a two-level activity now. Stealing credentials, and you've got to run simulations to understand how you can protect the theft of credentials. And then if those credentials have been stolen, and therefore you assume that the bad guys have therefore bought those credentials through the dark web and can now use them to launch a ransomware attack, how do you then protect yourself from what we call horizontal movement? Right. So we tend to do two levels, stopping at the front door, and then understanding, okay, they've got through through various means. How do you look at how good you are at preventing horizontal movement, preventing lockout in certain systems? And I think that two-phased approach is important because it is actively following how most of the current ransomware attacks are done.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. Good question from Paul McCallum, actually, which is quite a point I wanted to come on to. Do you pen test /attack /vulnerability scan at your suppliers?
Yeah, we I think like most companies, we now utilize third-party tools to carry out analysis of vulnerabilities in our suppliers. Of course we do. Clearly, there are many tools out there I won't mention, but you've got Risk Recon, BitSight, a whole range of different companies offer algorithms which allow you to check the outside first of many of these companies to see what their general health is and then to grade them. We use that then to have a conversation with our supplier. And I think that's important because what you can do is you can check the nature of your supplier based on those tools. We also use other tools to look at the intelligence around those companies as well, not just the algorithm of the checker. And by using the two together, you can have a conversation with the supplier. And that conversation allows you to help them improve. Or in the case of some of our key suppliers, say, look, unless you invest in some improvement, we're going to struggle to do business with you because, you are now a weak point in our supply chain. And this is so critical with software vendors. And SolarWinds was a great example. I just wonder what happened if you'd run a check on SolarWinds in terms of a risk recon check or an intelligence check before their attack and decided whether they were actually well set up to protect themselves, ? So we're doing a lot around the software vendors, a lot around our third-party software suppliers, trying to understand what their weaknesses are. And then that allows us, again, to have a conversation with them about levels of improvement. So kind of story short, yes, we are using tools. It's becoming a growth industry as it should do. You're only as good as the weakest link in your supply chain, really.
Yeah. Well, we'll stick with that in a second. I just want to address that Minesh has come up with a point which I thought was quite interesting. Been trying to do cost up how much our incidents cost us. Found it very hard to measure loss of customer confidence, for example. Estimate loss of potential future orders due to an availability incident, which is like there's the direct cost, and then there's 2-3 months later, are people still thinking, oh, I won't order with them? Interesting one. Just in terms of those simulations. One thing I found was interesting about the Colonial Pipeline attack was there's been this traditional division between operational technology and information technology, and protect the boundary between the two. I found it really interesting in Colonial. It wasn't, as far as I'm aware, they didn't affect the operational technology at all, but they didn't need to, because as soon as you hit the payroll and the billing, the operational technology had to go into a halt. I just don't see that division just making sense anymore. What do you think at Maersk?
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic point. I mean, absolutely. I think the two most recent ransomware attacks were against the IT systems rather than the OT. And both Colonial and I think JBS most recently were shut down their IT as a safety precaution. Now, that indicates generally a lack of confidence on segregation between IT and OT systems. And you look as far back as 2013, 2014, when Target was hit in the US through their own OT systems, that lack of segregation between IT and OT is an attack vector, of course. If the bad folks can exploit a vulnerability in the OT space, and you haven't segregated that from your IT environment properly, then it's a way in. And your confidence factor is going to be low if you've not done that segregation. I think what Colonial did was probably right in terms of safety. What they didn't want to do was if they had no confidence that there was segregation, therefore there was a danger their OT systems could be shut down. That's a safety issue. If you're pumping thousands of gallons of fuel at pressure through a pipeline, you don't want a valve to be turned off at the wrong time. So, the argument is perhaps they did the right things from a safety point of view. But the key issue is segregation. The key issue is now looking at how your OT and IT environments are not going to impact each other, how you're operating the right controls in the OT environment from a safety point of view first, which is what we're doing. We're looking at the safety angle first, as you should, to say, will a cyber attack fail safe for us, just to make sure that that's the first instance. And then the second instance is, will that lead to a breach of our IT systems? If so, what do we do? So, these are the questions that all companies have to ask themselves, particularly as the sort of final point. The reason this is becoming more of an issue than ever before is that, like many companies, we're instrumenting our OT networks for good reason. We want to automate. We also want to extract data from those OT systems to improve efficiency. Data is the key thing. And those data solutions through IoT are creating, points of attack and gateways. Of course they are. Yeah. And therefore, you need to consider them in the same way you'd consider protecting your IT. And that's the mindset you've got to have.
Are you in a slightly King Midas position with that? I suspect there's a part of you that wants to say, look, stop, I've got enough on my plate securing all of this stuff. Stop fitting microcomputers to every container ship. Presumably that's just not feasible. You can't. To what extent can you actually hold back that process for a little bit?
It's a really good point. And I think, and this is my line at the moment. My job is not to stop productivity. Any CISO who thinks that, I had a joke the other day. The best form of security is to turn everything off. And the CISO job would be much easier if those damn users weren't using the systems all the time. Damn it. The reality of life is productivity has to be balanced against risk. You've got to continue to drive productivity and improvement. The company's job is to drive those improvements. Your job is to work with them to ensure that that's integrated in. And we've adopted a proactive rather than a reactive posture now, that rather than go back and try and fix things afterwards, let's get in front of the train and try and fix the solutions as they go out the door, and be much more proactive in building resilient solutions from day one. That doesn't require us to say, stop, we need to just double check this. Okay. This goes back to anybody who's ever worked in quality knows that when many years ago, the idea of stopping the production line to check something every now and again was replaced with the idea that you build quality in, you don't check it out, as it were. And that's the same principle for cyber today. You've got to build cyber in so you don't have to stop things or delay things. You must not be the inertia, because the minute you become the inertia, guess what happens? You get bypassed.
But that goes back also to your point about visibility. You've got to know what your dev team, what software they're developing and the apps they're developing to kind of get in front of that train. Can I just, we'll slightly get to the end of things, which is a shame. It's a fascinating discussion. I'd love to go on much, much longer, but we've got things to do. JBS, you talked about, this was the meat supplier in the US that again got hit with ransomware. Talk about the impact that had on you, because this goes to there's a really good example of the supply chain and how it impacts things.
Yeah, I mean, customers, and they're a customer of ours. We value them very highly, and clearly we were anxious to help at the time. JBS, like many of our customers, we always try and reach out if our customers have been hurt by a cyber attack. We've had a number of them over the last few years, and I guess we can share our experiences and our knowledge And I think I will go back to say that's probably the critical, most important thing we should do today. And it's not just suppliers; customers are part of the supply chain as well. We just happen to be in the middle of a supply chain, managing it, orchestrating it, and helping our customers. And I think helping our customers includes helping them from a cyber point of view. So, we were the first to ask, can we help? Is there anything we can, both from a business point of view? So clearly we were anxious to be able to move their meat products and continue the process. But at the same time, is there anything we can help, in terms of recovery? And I think all of us have to take that mindset. There was a joke a few years ago that, you don't have to outrun the tiger, just the person behind you. And that was a mentality where, they're only going to go after the weakest link. We're all right. That can't happen anymore. In an interconnected world where suppliers are so interconnected with you in a digital sense, and your customers are connected with you in a digital sense, we're all in this together. We've got to work together. We've got to help each other. We can't just assume that it's happened to somebody else, few. We've actually got to say, right, let's lean in and help them recover, or offer assistance at least to help them recover. Now, many of them will say, thank you, we're okay, we'll crack on. And that's often because of legal and other advice they've had. But at least you've got to offer. You've got to provide that guidance.
Good stuff, Andy. That's fascinating. Thanks so much for talking us through that. I really, really appreciate it. I was just thinking, actually, in terms of the Colonial Pipeline attack and the JBS thing, hitting American beef burgers and petrol. Maybe the hackers know exactly how to cause pain to folks in the US. Look, Andy, that's been fascinating. Andy Powell, who's CISO, of course, at AP Moller Maersk. Thank you for your time. Thank you all for attending as well this Thursday morning on teissTalks. Next Tuesday at 4, my co-host Jenny Radcliffe will be talking about return on investment from your SOC, measuring impact and reporting progress, from Joyce Rodriguez from Shell. So another big critical CNI kind of company to talk to next Tuesday at 4. She'll see you then. I'll see you next Thursday at 10. Have a great rest of the weekend, and a good weekend. Thanks again to Andy. Thanks to our panelists. We'll see you again soon on another teissTalk. Cheerio.